empowering youth as social justice leaders. So the kind of work that we do, I would like to categorize these into three kinds. One is awareness programs, and the other would be awareness campaigns, and then the final thing is action camps. So as far as awareness campaigns are concerned, I think you guys are familiar with McLeodganj, with Dharamshala and all that, right? So if you guys visit there, as like how you guys go for a tour and travel or trips, what you can witness over there is we have a little awareness program called Little Hesa, or um, Tibet walking tour. So what happens is in Little Hesa, we educate, we bring out people who have registered for this program, and we familiarize them with Tibetan community, Tibetan culture, and the community system that we have established over there. And similar things with Tibet walking tour. What we do is we explore Tibetan culture in McLeodganj and all that. So both of these programs offer like a unique experience to others. And as far as awareness campaigns are concerned, what we have is like really impactful campaigns like the recent ones would be Thermo Fisher, don't help China steal Tibetan DNA. And then we have Stop Chinese Colonial Boarding Schools in Tibet. And then Protect Tibet's Climate and Environment. So these are like some of the major campaigns that we are focusing on currently. And then as far as action camps are concerned, what we do is like we try to nurture the next generation of not only Tibetans, but even Indians. We nurture the activists and all that. So the action camp is starting on October. You can also register for that if you're interested. And so in total, like SFT is committed to its mission in expanding its influence. And if you would if you guys are interested in supporting us or being a part of us, we have a registration desk set up down there in Adda, so we would be really like to have you guys. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. My apologies to all the speakers for rushing you, but it means we do have a healthy 45 minutes for Q&A. So not just questions, but comments. It's a conversation. For many of our students, it's the first opportunity you have to interact with them. So please do ask questions. We can bunch a few questions together, or we can take them one-on-one. I'll see how that goes. But we do have plenty of time. So anyone wants to get us started? Any questions? Yes, please. And please introduce yourself. There's a mic that's going on.
Should I get up? Yeah. My name is Mohit Kathuria. I'm a PhD scholar at Jindal JSIA. I have a question for Mr. Api. First of all, sir, I'm a big fan. Your work really helped me a lot in my own master's thesis, so I'm really happy to have you here in front of me in flesh. I mean, it's really good to finally get that opportunity. Don't get that every day. So thank you for that. But I just wanted to ask you about this one, China's present conditions. It's that. Thanks. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about China's economic situation. It seems, from outside view, it seems to be fairly systemic because of the debt that they have taken in, and as Sir said, Dr. Kumar said that they from 2012 onwards they have grown very vast in a very big way. That has been because, and my analysis has been that it's because they've been allowed to take, and they have gotten a lot of capital investment. They're an investment-led economic model, and that's really gone up since 2012 in particular, beginning from 2008 financial crisis. They borrowed their way out of the crisis, as I said. So that's one. How much of that is real? Because there is a possibility of propaganda here. I think it's, I'll leave that to you. But another thing I wanted to ask is because I mean, culture and diplomacy is all good, but I do, from the facts that I get to see, is that the India, Tibet, China triangle has a massive military dimension. I do not believe that this, either if China goes through some period of weakness or is weakened, that a solution really is not militaristic, and onwards with that. With the recent disappearances and the continuing purges, literally from the day one of Xi Jinping's coming in to power till today, do you see that the routine purging of top officers is something that is beneficial for nations that have to, like even Taiwan, that may, and India and others that may have to fight against China on the battlefield? So I just want you to help me with that.
Regarding the economic factor, I think I would take the middle part. The part is obviously propaganda or exaggeration. You see, if you write a book, The Coming Collapse of China, you will sell lakhs of books. And it's very popular. People are very happy too. But sometimes that book of Gordon Chang was written maybe 30 years ago. Nothing happened. You have to realize that China is also very smart. They know how to correct the mistake. Today they are facing unprecedented. They have never faced such an economic problem that they are facing. But also we have to give them the opportunity to correct the mistakes. And Deng Xiaoping, when he started opening in 1978, it was a correction of so it's inbuilt in the system, normally they correct. But this time it's going much further. And I think I've always said that since decades that the Tibetans have only a chance is there is some sort, not of collapse, but that weakening, economic weakening of China. And the depth of the provinces, for example, is a very, very serious issue. So, and it seems last few weeks that Xi Jinping is not taking it seriously. Because there is a dichotomy between the ideology. He is following, said follow the party, but he's not taking as seriously because the reforms would need to be introduced. So I think, I don't think all the manufacturing will shift to India or like that. I don't think so. China has to take hard reforms. Are they capable? Because of the weakening of the system by purging and purging and purging people, and including the PLA. The PLA is much more serious because everyone spoke about Galwan or Eastern Ladakh in general, because they did not only in Galwan, they did in Depsang, in Demchok, or on Fingers, or in Hot Spring. But very often PLA is behind. And PLA issue is, I think today, maybe many people will not agree, but they don't follow always Xi Jinping. I think Tsondula spoke about Ahmedabad in 2014. The Chumar incident took place at the same time. It was a local commander with blessing from higher, from Zhao Zhongxi, the general who was commanding in Chengdu, who did it against Xi Jinping. When your president is visiting a foreign country, you don't attack that particular country. It's what they did in Chumar. So it has many times, very often, it has come again and again that the PLA is not fully following. And if something happens in Taiwan, it will not be a decision of Xi Jinping, who's speaking about global security initiative and about the peaceful rise of China. But it will be from the PLA. So he has to tackle all these issues. I think it's an impossible task for one man. And when you have one man, it's easier to target. When if you have more consensus, collegial system of governance, you cannot be targeted one person. But even the way he targeted former President Hu Jintao during the Congress, there is something really deep in the system which is not okay. And I don't remember the second question. Nobody understands. And I want to clarify, we just think that it's that way or that way, but it's very difficult to understand what's happening in China, particularly like in that rocket force. That commander of the rocket force was selected by Xi Jinping, and suddenly he's purged. The number 2 is kicked out, or he committed suicide. They jump through the windows usually when it's too serious issue. And the number 3 and 4 also, now the defense minister also. So it's difficult to understand because we don't have information, no? We don't, similarly in Tibet, Tandula was mentioning about the Himalayan people, but we don't have information. The information is not circulating. India is not able to send a message, or at one time RFA or Voice of America were able to broadcast in Tibet, but I don't think much now. And I think it's very limited also how they can communicate with their own family there. I don't know if WeChat still works, but there's everywhere they are monitored. The system, especially after 2008, the unrest in 2008, which correspond to the Olympics in Beijing, has been very, very, very much tightened at every level, and they are far in advance on any country in the world for tightening the system. So it's very difficult for people to even to know what they think. And these people, these 650 Shaogang village, what do people happy? Is it sustainable? How long they can? They have obviously subsidizing these villages. They are putting billions of dollars in these villages. But how long it can last? If you put a new village like that out of nowhere, you bring people. These people have to sustain themselves. So you can feed them if you're rich, if economy goes well. But when economy starts, I would not use collapsing, but when economy starts going slow, how do you get the money? Same thing with the BRI. How do you get the money? So everything at the end depends on if economy does well or not.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Anurag?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Anurag Sharma. I'm from MA-DLB second year, Diplomacy Law and Business. And I have 4 questions connected to a single issue. First of all, and it is to all of you. So first of all, there was a mention of India giving rights to Tibetans. So my first concern is there were 7 crore Tibetans, 70 million, fighting against a few 100,000 Chinese. How come no one resisted to defend their lands? Then when it comes to the giving of issue of giving rights, like there could be a possibility that Tibetans might have demanded that rights from India and saying that we will continue resisting, give the rights to us. Now coming to second question, again connected. When we say calling India or some other country for help, when a country is called and the people are ready to fight for their cause, then it is considered as they are coming for liberation. Otherwise, it is like you are calling for intervention and it might cause problem in the future. So it is again a complexity when it comes to take decision for a country. Then third part, I am glad that you have mentioned General Zorawar. So the war between the Sino-Sikh war, it is called in textbooks. Again, Chinese and Sikhs, but as you have said it is not Chinese. So it suggests that there was a contested relationship between Sikh Empire and the people of Tibet who were ruling there. Now, if you bring in again saying that it was Sikhs fighting Chinese, then again it will be wrong. There is another facet to it. If they were fighting Manchus, and again it was Sikh Empire, it was not India, then saying that India was fighting Tibet or India was fighting China, again it will be wrong. So going forward, when it comes to political narrative, it again creates problem to bring forward what kind of narrative to be set up while going forward with regard to this issue. Again, I would like to take the example of Afghanistan. When they left Americans, there was demand from India that you should come and protect them. But again, the issue was there was no demand from the people of Afghanistan to call India for the protection. So here I would like to rest, please.
Third and fourth question, if you could ask them
Third,
quickly.
third was again, it was not Sikhs fighting Chinese, and it was not India fighting China or Tibet. So how to find a relationship when it comes to going forward?
Yeah, good. You picked up on that. That's a provocation. The story of rice thing is something that I got to learn much later. It was not there in any of the textbooks or anything, much later. And also, Claude Arby has mentioned about it. When I said, and also what Claude was talking about, India giving rice was not to Tibetans. They were giving to the Chinese soldiers who were invading Tibet. So in a way, it was India's aid to China who was invading Tibet. Because at that time, it was Hindi-Chini bhai-bhai relationship. India was in this hope that India and China were likely to be important and rising powers in Asia. There was no sense of any fear or suspicion that India was going to be attacked by China in 1962. So therefore, हम अक्सर कहते हैं कि उन्होंने पीठ पे छुरा भोग दिया है. So I think that is important. When China invaded Tibet, Tibet asked for help to three forces. One was the United States, and the other one was UK and India. United States refused to help. UK said, we are now left India, and we have no force to support Tibet from South Asia. India said, we have just become independent, so we have no way of supporting Tibet. So that was the time when China invaded Tibet in 1950. When we are talking about Tibetan freedom movement, there is not much awareness. And I was starting my talk right from there about the general ignorance about Tibet and also Tibetan freedom movement. After China's invasion of Tibet, Tibet lost 1/6 of its population. Tibetan population is 6 million. And out of that, more than 1 million Tibetans died of starvation, famine, persecution, torture, and execution. Untold suffering what Tibetans had to undergo. And Indians wouldn't know because there was this friendship between China and India, and wouldn't talk about or spread any information about that in India. In the recent times, in 11, 12 years, 157 Tibetans burned themselves in the form of self-immolation. How many of you knew about it? No one. Because Indian media doesn't talk about it. They are not interested. Of course, Indian textbooks, I cannot expect any of them to talk about. So obviously, you wouldn't know. So it is just the ignorance part. Sino-Sikh war, I was saying at that time, the the construction of the narrative that was Sino-Sikh war, it's a continuation of the British policy. The British looked at Tibet as an opportunity to create a buffer zone from Russians one side and China on the other side. And the British, in order to create a better relationship with Tibet, signed McMahon Treaty to appease Tibet. And in the similar agreement, the British tried to make a borderline between Tibet and China, where China signed but did not mark the seal. So therefore, it is considered inconclusive. And some of the maps Claude RP showed here when we are looking at the important historical maps. So therefore, this narrative that the British created, it became a legacy in India. So it was not Sino-Sikh war, it was Sikh regiment supporting Ladakh and then invading Tibet. In support of Tibet was the Manchu Protectorate. It was the Manchus who were coming in to represent Tibet. So it was a mix of Tibetans and Manchu, some of the leaders fighting that. So there was, again, no China. Yeah. So these are the notions considered normal and general, which needs to be contested and neutralized and bring in Indian perspective to it, and we should not continue the British perspective that has been placed on us. Thank you.
I'm not sure I've heard all the question, but about what Songdula said in the UN when the issue came, there was an issue for the British, because the British knew very well that Tibet was independent. British had representation in Lhasa since 1904, since Young Husband, and after the Shimla Convention. But there was a debate in the UN in November 1950. If we say, the British argue, if we say that Tibet is independent, that we know, what will we do? Are we going, if we agree in the UN that Tibet has been invaded, what will we do? So in London, they said we can't do anything. We do not. So they decided to change the legal status of Tibet. There was an exchange between the British representative in the UN, in the US, in New York, and London, to change. They said, like that is better, like that we don't have anything to do. That is an interesting argument, because it happens also in the case, for example, I mentioned Minsar, that small town in Tibet. Nehru said, before the starting of the Panchil negotiation, what will we do? We can't defend it. We can't collect taxes from this place. It's ours, okay, but we can't do anything. Today, many aspects of the Tibet policy of the government of India is, what can we do? We cannot go, we cannot send the army the other side. We can't occupy the Chumbi Valley. Actually, in 1950, the political officer in Sikkim, Mr. Harish Dayal, as well as the officer in Lhasa, they say if China come, it was in August of September 1950, we occupy the Chumbi Valley. And they will stop their advance. So unless you're prepared to do something like that, otherwise you can't do anything. It's no, so the argument was, it's better we keep it low, don't rock the boat, and we can't do anything about it, so let's even change the legal status of that country for that sake. And British had prepared in 46 a plan to defend military Tibet. They had drawn a line between eastern Tibet, Chamdo, Lhasa, even north Dakchu, and western Tibet. And they said if the Russian, the Soviet, or the Chinese cross that line, will send military force in Tibet. But at that time, they only thought of a squadron of the Royal Air Force. They didn't think of any infantry or artillery support. They always thought they could only defend by the air. And it's air which was not used in 1962. So,
Well, I want to add to the people who had asked question. This, as you said, British changed the legal status of Tibet to avoid their embarrassment. This sovereignty and suzerainty business, which was done by the Indian diplomats, do you want to say something about that? This whole idea of this myth of or fiction of suzerainty of China over Tibet?
The Indian ambassador in China, K.M. Panikar, first of all, he served twice in China under the nationalist government in Nanjing and later on the communists. It's very rare. Usually when an ambassador serves in one regime, he will not be reappointed. But he was the main advisor for Nehru in what became later Indichini Bye-Bye. So one time in one of the report, one of the documents, which was a root document for deciding the policy, it sends sovereignty, which was the official word used by government, to sovereignty, which is a huge. And after that, they say, no, it was a lapsus, it was a mistake in writing. And, but it was too late because China had already used it and had the green light to continue their advance in eastern Tibet, in Chamdo. So changing one word, it was not a mistake. He did on purpose. Panikar, I know that because I've seen documents in the Nehru papers. But when it was done, other people, Bajpai, who was the Secretary General of the Ministry of External Affairs and Commonwealth, and KPS Menon, they objected, and Prime Minister agreed, but it was too late. It had already gone, and China had already got the message. It's not the connection between China and Tibet, it's sovereignty, not suzerainty, which was totally different in, you can explain, in international law.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add, so some of what Mr. RP was just saying, if you go to his site, these documents are there. So I do want to again underline that these are very valuable primary documents that he's very generously made available in the public domain. Also, the Indian Parliament, parliamentary discussions on the issue of Tibet, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha proceedings from the late 40s, through the 60s, 70s, they are up there as well. Some of these debates come up. In fact, Nehru, in answering one of the Lok Sabha questions, also talks about the suzerainty versus sovereignty debate. About historical maps, if you're interested, I mean, again, the website is a good source, but also I hope some of you would look up Pahar.in, which is a good source for maps of the Himalaya. Also the Historical Atlas of South Asia. Very often we forget. The other day, I'd given a map to my students here in a course at JSLH and just asked them to map the Himalayan states, and some of them couldn't. So I think it's very important. I know it's perhaps not required anymore in school curriculums, but to actually, look at contemporary maps and also historical maps. So much of the story is there. When you see Tibet on the map, like you realize how important that is, and it's not the size of Bhutan or Sikkim, So I think maybe just check that out. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, so many. Wonderful. Wow. Okay. So we're going to take 3 at a time. So Rakshit, did you have a question? Did you raise your hand? No? Oh, okay. So 3 here and then here. We'll come to everybody. We have plenty of time. Don't worry. So we'll take 3 at a time. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is to Mr. Tenzin. My name is Shubhangi. I'm from a master's in JSIA. So my question is, what do you think is the future of Buddhism in Tibet or the people of Tibet now that the present Dalai Lama is getting old and China, it is certain that China will meddle in the selection or the appointment of the next Dalai Lama?
Okay, 2 more questions here.
I'm Nitya from MADLB. My question is to Mr. Tenzin. Do you think it's possible?
And don't use acronyms maybe for the schools or degrees, maybe if you could spell it. Yeah, that might be.
Masters in Diplomacy, Law and Business. And my question is, do you think it's possible to have Tibet for Tibetans with peace?
Hello, everyone. My name is Himakshi. I'm also a master's student, just as Nitya and Shubhangi. So my question is regarding environment, and it's a general question. So apart from strategic and cultural importance of Tibet, I think most of us know that Tibet is very important for South Asian monsoons. And considering Chinese presence in Tibet right now, my first question would be, how do we draw a relationship between the Chinese presence and deteriorating environmental conditions on Tibetan Plateau, considering it's the third pole apart from North and South Pole in the world? And my second question would be, as students of IR, activists and researchers, how do we contribute to the protection of Tibetan Plateau, considering its utmost climatic and environmental importance in Indian subcontinent?
Thank you. We'll have one more question from this side, so, and then we'll move to that side. Thank you. So I hope you'll stay for the next, there'll be presentations on environment following lunch as well. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I am from MA DLB. And I am Sanjali. So my question, I have two questions. So my first question would be for Mr. Tenzin Sundwe. You have mentioned that China, 60% of China's areas just occupied 4 countries actually. So, and you are also mentioning that, okay, so China is going to break down. So considering the current scenario, China seems to have more expansionist. So how it would be possible? And the next question would be for Dr. Anand Kumar sir, that so far India followed appeasement policy for China, and I think Tibet's occupation was outcome of that. So do you think there was any kind of other policy options for India? What could be the best possible way to protect Tibet? Because it was the era of Cold War also. So my question would be that.
Thank you. Rakshit, we'll take yours in the next round. Okay.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. So my question is to Mr. Tenzin. You mentioned about Tibetan Buddhists being the predominant religion, Buddhism being the predominant religion, and you mentioned also about the Christians in Tibet. But surprisingly, you didn't mention about the Muslims in Tibet. What about the communities like Lhasa Khache in Ladakh, which Professor Swati Chawla introduced to me, through the documentary? What about them who don't have the identity of being neither Tibetans nor Indians in Ladakh? So how do they, as a community, feel, and how's the relationship between Tibetan Buddhists and them? That's the question. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's enough for now, and then we'll come to this side of the room.
Okay, so so many questions. I'll try to answer briefly and fast. The first question was about Buddhism and its future. Buddhism doesn't depend only on His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Today there's a contestation between India and China on the proprietorship of Buddhism. If you have noticed, there is the international conference that China organizes where they spend so much of money bringing all Buddhist experts, scholars, monks to China to show that they are the most powerful, they're the champions of Buddhism. Buddhism is a soft power. It's endearing to anyone. And India also does the same. There's also the International Buddhist Confederation, IBC, that organizes a Buddhist conference here. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is only the leader. And of course, China wouldn't invite His Holiness to China on those conferences, but India does. So there are many questions in this simple question about future of Buddhism. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as far as we talk about Tibetans, for us, he is the Buddha of love and compassion. And we believe that, that there is an entire system with which we keep seeing birth of the new Dalai Lama. This is the 14th one, and there will be the 15th, because Tibetan people continue to believe in this. Now, it will become most contested politically, because now there is American interest in it, there will be Indian interest in it, and most importantly, there will be Chinese interest in it. As His Holiness says, this is my life, let me decide. So therefore, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama's words will be final on this. But then your question is not just about the Dalai Lama, it's about the future. I believe that the Tibetans have, ever since we received Buddhism from India, we are convinced that this is our thought culture with which one can achieve happiness. Here, the happiness depends on the way you maintain yourself and not dependent on material resources. Your happiness does not come from your house or money or any other thing. Your happiness comes from your capacity to deal with issues in your life. And Buddhism has an entire system in giving this education in the monasteries and also personally as an individual. So therefore, I believe that Buddhism has a future, and Tibet is going to be one of the important Buddhist nations in future. The second question was about Tibet, whether it would find a peaceful solution. I think this has to do with international politics, because issue of Tibet today is not just Tibet, it's international politics, and increasingly more so. Many countries, including India, many of the Western countries are also interested in Tibet issue today, more so because China is troubling them. China is weaponizing its trade. China is weaponizing its supply chains, punishing some of the Western countries for not catering to their ideas of development, their ideas, when they are especially questioned about human rights. China is not happy. So China uses trade supply chain in order to punish many of the Western countries. So therefore, it is going to be a contested area. We wish that Tibet regains its independence peacefully. About the environment question, I would leave it for the next session, because there's an entire session for it, and there are experts talking about it. Then there is a question about Tibet and international politics. And I still think that Tibet not only has been occupied, but for the recent 30, 40 years, and this is what I usually speak when I go to Europe and America, that as much as China has occupied and destroyed Tibet in the way they have, the Western countries are complicit in this occupation. But here is the new neo-colonialism, where earlier the Western countries would exploit natural resources in Asia and Africa, and take natural resources to their countries, make cheap products, and then sell it back to Asia and Africa. Now, most of the Western countries, in some cases like America, 90 to 95% of their finished products, their consumer goods, are from China. And they are made cheap because China has occupied four countries, and taking away natural resources from these countries make cheap made-in-China products, and they sell it back to Western countries. Western countries have benefited from this, because now they don't have to dirty their environment. They don't have to dig natural resources in their countries. They don't have to flout environment or labor laws in their countries, and yet continue to receive finished products from China conveniently at the cost of Tibetans, at the cost of people in East Turkestan, at the cost of southern Mongolia, Manchuria, and the Chinese population, which is 800 million workforce. This is the new neo-colonialism which is going on. So I am saying the Western countries are complicit in occupation of Tibet, and they must take responsibility on this. So I've been asking these leaders in the West, you have benefited at our cost. And in the recent years, 150 Tibetans have burned themselves in self-immolation. There is a genocide going on in my country. What are you going to do for Tibet now?
Regarding the future of Tibet, I don't know, very difficult. Tibetan, they do with dice, no, they do divination more, but I'm not expert, so I won't say. But I remember in 1986, once I had an audience with His Holiness, I asked, what is the future? How will you be free? He said, we are a small country. It's better for us to be non-violent. We can't fight them. So very practical, not ideological. It's better to be non-violent. But he said that change will come from China. And I still believe, from that day, I still believe that change will come from China. Unless there's a very deep change in China, Tibet will not be free. Because you can't, we have seen in Ladakh, we have seen in Yangtze, we can stop them, but we can't invade Tibet. I'll say something that maybe Tsondula will not agree with me, or many of my Tibetan friends don't agree, but the Tibetan system of governance was very weak. Ruled by reincarnation, it means 20 or 25 years of gap between the time the person passed away, his reincarnation is looked for, is found, and is enthroned, and he becomes an adult able to govern his country. There's another possibility of some emanation, like something like Shankaracharya. You have a junior Shankaracharya and a senior Shankaracharya. I think for me, it's I'm not speaking about the religious level at all. I don't know, and I won't speak, but very practically, it's something very much, much better, because in the sense that today the world is going very fast. Everyone is saying in that declaration for the G20 again, it's mentioned everything changed so fast. You can't have a gap of governance for 20 years. That has been an issue. In 19th century, there was 5 Dalai Lama. They all passed away before the age of 18, 19. And as a result, there was no governance in Tibet. And as a result, the China start influencing through the Anban mentioned by Tsondu in the morning. So that is something that the Tibetans should mention seriously. Ultimately, it's only His Holiness who will decide. It's his own reincarnation. But at the same time, there are many stakeholders. For India, it's very important that if there is no governance, so all this hopefully will be taken into account before taking a decision.
There was this question about what choices India had in 1949, 56 or 59 period. You know, in international relations, there are 4 possibilities for any country to respond to a challenge. There are 4 C's. One is confrontation. The other is conflict, which is a little lower degree challenging the other side. The third is containment, and 4th is cooperation. Unfortunately, India went for cooperation. We kept on moving with the Chinese in international arena till we had our own tragedy of 1962. So there was possibility of containment. There was also possibility of conflict, right from United Nations organization to many other institutional mechanisms. We could have done better than what we did. Actually, our self-confidence collapsed. We were found wanting in our defense preparedness. We were missing the role of what you call spying, or there is a better word for spying. Intelligence, gathering intelligence. And we were also we were found totally indifferent about defense imperative. A new nation state which had experienced Kashmir in 1948 should have been aware of the requirement of a strong defense mechanism. We were peace builders, no doubt, and we wanted peace. We wanted the world to move beyond the shadow of world wars. But not as a weak nation state, as we proved, that we were non-performing asset for the rest of the world. The world moved into 2 blocks of Cold War, and now world is again at the feet of America and China, and not listening to the Indian messages, no matter who does it, whether it is UPA, ND, or... So there was possibility of another route, but then that's part of history, and we must not dig history too much. Then if we get too much into history analysis, we'll miss the future building. So we must look at future building rather than history analysis.
I know there were quite a few questions on this side. I'll just ask you, we're actually out of time. We can take them maybe. I just have 2 more minutes or I'll be out of a job. They're going to kick me off the stage because we have to eat. If your question has been answered, please don't ask it. And please ask just 1 question per person. I'm so, so sorry, guys. Really sorry. And very quickly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I am Chirag. I am a doctoral researcher here in the Jindal School of International Affairs. I have this question, like all 3 of you in some way or the other mentioned that India should portray and to the globe as well as to China that we have our border with Tibet and not China. How feasible is that, and what changes how does it change the dynamics of India-China relations?
Thank you. Second question. So sorry to do this, guys.
Hi, I'm Raghav Sharma, Masters in Diplomacy Law Business first year. My question is regarding, it's an open question. So the version of Buddhism, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that is followed in Tibet is closer to Vajrayana Buddhism as well, and it has a lot of esoteric practices as well, which are a different school or which are pretty different as well from the way Buddhism is followed in many other countries as well. And
what's the question?
So the question is that do you think that there are certain sectarian differences have created any obstacle in, let's say, an international rallying for the Tibetan cause as well?
Thank
And the
you.
protection of the
So sorry to do this. Really sorry. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ipsa Sahu. I am a PhD scholar from JSIA. My question is to Dr. Anand Kumar sir. So you mentioned about the India, Tibet and China in the Indo-Pacific relationship. I wanted to ask that India is part of Quad, whereas it has substantially avoided AUKUS, which is a military kind of a military organization power. So my question is, how do you think that it will impact the Indo-Pacific region and India, Tibet and China relations?
Thank you. Last question. Sorry.
So after World War II, the Allies tried their best to contain the communism in Asia. For example, in Korea, what prevented the Allies to take a similar stand on Tibet in 1949 and 50?
Thank you. Everyone gets just 1 minute. So sorry to do this.
एक रोटी कम खाएंगे तो 5 मिनट और मिल जाएगा. तो आप लोग भी एक रोटी कम खाइएगा, हम भी एक रोटी कम खाएंगे. The question about Indo-Pacific region and relation between India, China and Tibet triangle is related with India's strategy of walking on 2 legs. On the one hand, they are trying to bring together those who are hurt or who are offended or who are apprehensive about the Chinese power. So Quad is one example. But on the other hand, they are also engaging with China, BRICS, and many other possibilities. G20 is the recent one. So India is not really playing foolish and becoming totally dependent on one or the other possibility. India is exploring both possibilities. One, decline of China. The other, emergence of hegemonic China, and how to engage both possibilities. The other thing I wanted to say was that given the present situation, do not think too much about your certainty about future. Nobody could predict that 12 nation states will be born out of Soviet Union in 1980s. But those countries were alive and the resistance was there. There were people like you who kept on writing, hoping against hope. So predicting future is always a dangerous game, like your reference to a book which said China is about to collapse. Is overheated steam, what is it? Steam?
Became rich.
Yeah. What pressure cooker? It will blast. No. So there are possibilities both ways, that we may not have good result in the near future, and there is a possibility that you may have much nearer solutions than you expect.
We live in a very uncertain world, and nobody knew about COVID and what it created. So similarly, people who are just do a trajectory like that in 2049, China will reach that level. That is not. I want to say something, it's not a question, but India did something very bold and very quick in 1951. They occupied Taiwan, because at that time it was really a very fast operation with the Assam Rifle and Major bobcatting. Taiwan was not administrated, but though on the map it had been signed in 1914. Between 14 and 51 it was not administrated, and it was decided by the governor of Assam without reference to the Prime Minister to occupy Taiwan, because they said if we don't occupy Taiwan now, it will become part of China. And Major bobcatting with the Assam Rifle went to Taiwan, occupied it, and really they were welcomed by the Mompa people. And that's a very, very bold and very decisive action which has been taken not by government of India, but at least by the governor of Assam and the Assam Rifle. So that's a very interesting move.
Yeah. Continuing from what Claude said, India's insistence on McMahon Treaty is to show that the other side is Tibet. Because the McMahon Treaty was signed between Tibet and British India. India doesn't recognize China. So India is already showing that the other side is Tibet without making it an obvious sign. Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetans have explored this aspect of Buddhism to a much larger aspect of scholarship, disciplining, and use of one's body, where the mind can rule over the body, which also includes that one can control one's hormonal flow, body temperature, heartbeats, all of it. Once you do meditation on this, one could control this. This is something that the Tibetans have really done so much of expertise, and also practice on this, and brought Buddhism a different dimension of it. Allied forces, at the time of Chinese invasion of Tibet, many anti-communist powers came together and brought Tibet issue at the United Nations. United Nations heard Tibet and passed 3 resolutions, 1951, 59, 63, and 65. 3 resolutions were passed, and they were supported by Malaya, Ireland, El Salvador. So you will see at that time there were some kind of support. But at that time we must also remember that China was not represented at the United Nations. It was represented by ROC, Republic of China. And finally, I still have to say that the very idea of free Tibet is possible, and we must continue to say this to ourselves: Tibet ki azadi, Bharat ki suraksha. And I am someone who do not believe in charity. Tibet will be free not because India loves Tibet, but because India will find it necessary for its own security and long-term future, that Tibet becomes free and independent. And that political necessity has also created Bangladesh and also created Pakistan. So there will be a political necessity which would be pushed by many other countries, not just India, many other countries, especially United States and many countries in the West, who would be by then, in the next 5-10 years, too troubled by China. They would then push it. So this is where I see. So with this, we conclude here. Free Tibet. Thank you.
I just want to add about the resolution in UN 5961. India abstained, but in 65. India voted in favor of the resolution, and the Indian representative gave a very beautiful speech that you should read. It means that the policy of the government of India has not always been. Unfortunately, Lal Bahadur Shastri passed away very soon when he went to Tashkent a few months later, and that was one tragedy. I've written a small book, Karma of Tibet. Many times when something was coming on the possibility, something else happened.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentations. We explored some very generally untouched arenas of India-Tibet relations. So thank you so much for kindly taking the questions and answering them so patiently. We would now like to felicitate our guests and would request Professor Swati Chawla to please help us.
Also wanted to say you guys were a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. Clap for yourselves.
On behalf of India-Tibet Coordination Office, we would also like to felicitate the speakers, because I think one of the speakers would be leaving after lunch. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I have copies of my book with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much once again. We will break for the lunch right now, and we'll rejoin here and we'll start at 2:30. So please come back for an extremely interesting session on climate change, the Tibetan Plateau, the future of South Asia. So we'll see you again at 2:30, requesting the dignitaries to kindly join me and Dr. Panigrihi.
All people.
No, sir. All people are dignitaries.
Thanks, guys. Do be back after lunch.
Okay, so this is going to be another very interesting session, and I think we should probably start if Professor Rajdeep Pakanati, who's the moderator, is okay with it. Yeah, I think the others will probably trickle in slowly. But requesting the speakers for this session, Dr. Lobsang Yangso and Ms. Dhondup Wangmo, to please join us on stage. And the moderator for this session is Dr. Rajdeep Pakanati, who is a professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs.
Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome the speakers to come and join us here. Good afternoon, everyone, once again. Thank you for joining us on this session, which focuses on climate and tries to situate Tibet in this particular context. As a teacher of political science and international relations, generally we think about security matters and what have been referred to as high politics of war, conflict, and whatnot. But I think, even I feel as I'm still alive, and for future generations, when we think about potential threats, I think climate change is here to stay, and we need to acknowledge it, and we need to take it seriously. And in some ways, transform climate as a matter into high politics, because we are living it. It's here. It's not a projected thing to happen. So to have a panel on this climate change and trying to situate Tibet in it, I think it's very timely. And I would wonder whether it will provide a newer imagination to even think about security. So I am very glad to be here to listen and learn rather than share any of my expertise on this. So first, I would like to welcome Dr. Lobsang Yangso, who's the Program and Environment Coordinator in the International Tibet Network. She is a scholar, a senior researcher for the International Tibet Network in Dharamshala, and holds a PhD degree in Chinese Studies from Center for East Asian Studies in the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So her research focuses on climate change in Tibet and the Himalayan regions, and China's environmental policies towards Tibet, climate change on the Brahmaputra River, and China and Tibet relations. So I think she is very well placed to provide us a larger picture after gaining some insights in the morning, even through the cartographic imagination. So I welcome Dr. Yangso to make a presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajdeep. And I would also like to thank Jindal University and ITCO for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak a little bit about environment and water specifically. And I also would like to thank all of you for coming. And I know after lunch and then in the morning, we had a very intense discussion on politics, religion, and border issue. So right now, I will be focusing more on Tibet. And since my background or training is from international relation and humanities, so I would like to focus more on human aspect of the policies and how that impacts on policies and people and community as well. With that, I don't want to go too detailed on the geography of whole Tibet Plateau, because in the morning we had a huge section, both all the three speakers, Professor Anand Kumarji and Claude Arbi and Sundula also talked a lot about the whole Tibetan Plateau. But it's also very important to understand that when I say Tibet or Tibetan Plateau, I mean, as you all know that China refers only parts of Tibet as a Tibet, and which they call Tibet Autonomous Region. And in my research, I focus all the three provinces of Tibet, Uzang, Kham, and Amdo. And then I look from water perspective and how that impacts on the neighboring countries as well. And before we speak on the major rivers that flow from Tibet to India, it's, I think, very important to understand what is actually happening on the Tibetan Plateau in terms of climate change. So that will have a huge impact, or we can also have some understanding of the changes that we see on the Tibetan Plateau, and then its impact on the whole Himalaya belt, and more specifically on India as well. And so one is the major issue that we talk about climate change is rise of temperature on the whole Tibetan Plateau. And Tibet Plateau is warming 2 to 4 times faster than the rest of the world, meaning that it has experienced the increase in temperature, resulting in ecological degradation, and then also impacting on water security of the neighboring country as well. And because of the rise of temperature, we have a glacier melting on the whole Tibetan area, and so the rate of whole glacier melt has accelerated in the past century. So in terms of a glacier, so glaciers are the major sources of the rivers systems on Tibet. And so I would say approximately 6 to 45% of the rivers are dependent on the glaciers. And then that becomes increased to 70% in summer area as well. But then when we look at the rates of glacier melt, 20% of Tibetan glaciers have retreated in the past 40 years. And the scientists also say that more than 40% of the existing glaciers could be gone in the next 40 years as well. And then Isimot also says that, maybe in next decade or so the major rivers like Brahmaputra, Indus, or Satluj could become a seasonal river. So that's also one major issue that we see. And then IPCC also predicts that Himalaya glaciers would lose around 3/4 of their mass by 2100. So it's, I think when we talk about climate change on whole Tibetan Plateau, the impact of climate change on the Tibetan Plateau is still, I would say, unknown. But then there is also consensus among climate scientists that there is a whole change on the whole Tibetan Plateau because of the glacier melting. And then there is also the cases of increased monsoon, variability, and then because of the glacier melt and rise of temperature, we see glacier lake outbursts, floods as well, and then shrinking and disappearing of thousands of lakes. And then at the same time, we have also, in terms of climate change, grassland degradation is another major problem that we see on whole Tibetan Plateau. And earlier, Tsundula also mentioned about the nomadic and the grassland on the whole Tibetan Plateau. But then right now, because of the climate change and other man-made factors, the grasslands are turning into desert as well. And so desertification is increasing on Tibet as well. And then, of course, there is a permafrost melting on the whole Tibetan Plateau. So these are in terms of the climate change factors, but then we also have to understand the various Chinese government's environment policies like damming, mining and removal of Tibetan nomads from the grassland, and blaming the nomads for the cause of grassland degradation. And so there are also other factors that can also that is also giving a lots of impact on the whole ecosystem of Tibetan Plateau as well. And then in terms of the water security or the transboundary river policies by the Chinese government, what we see is that, so there are three factors what is happening on the Tibetan Plateau and why happening in terms of the water security or the Chinese government's policies on, river system in terms of mining and, water diversion projects, south-north water diversion projects and dam building is on because of the three major reasons. One, in terms of the hydroelectric power, and then also transboundary nature of the rivers, where Tibet being the source of the all the major rivers, then China has the, I would say, the benefit, or the China has the power to control it, and then not to negotiate with any of the downstream nations, and then water scarcity in China as that is another factor why we see lots of policies in terms of water security or in terms of water policies on Tibetan Plateau as well. And then in terms of how Chinese government managed with the transboundary river is that it's because of the upstream strategy that we see, or I see that it's very uncooperative upstream hegemony, right? So when I say that, I mean, China and India both has not signed the UN Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Use of International Watercourse, and China rejects the report of World Commission on Dams, and China has not signed any water treaty with any of its downstream nations. And so because of all these major reasons that we see that lots of dam constructions, and then China being not being answerable, or why we see a lack of transparency is because of those major reasons as well. And then when we look at in terms of transboundary rivers flow from Tibet to India, so there are two major river system from Tibet to India. One is the Brahmaputra river system, and the second is Indus river system, and which consists of both Indus and Satluj river. And I have been doing a bit of research. I think I would say a little bit more in-depth research on Brahmaputra. So I would like to emphasize more on Brahmaputra as well. So in terms of Brahmaputra river system, it flows of 2,900 kilometers, right? And then in terms of Indus, it flows of 3,000 kilometers, and then Satluj is 1,550 kilometers long. And then in terms of Brahmaputra, there is both competition both from India and China in terms of dam construction on the whole Brahmaputra river system. And we believe that, Brahmaputra, for Tibetan, the name of Brahmaputra is Yalung Tsangbo, and it has a huge, how would I say, significance for the whole history and how it connects with the local people as the Indus Valley civilization as well, Indus River civilization. But then the kind of competition that's happening on Brahmaputra is that in terms of dam construction, they have built one dam already and plan to build 3 more. And whereas other hydrologists or scientists say that China has plans to build 11 more dams on the Brahmaputra. At the same time, in Assam and Arunachal, the Indian government also has plans to build dams on that. And then in terms of bilateral collaboration on Brahmaputra water management, so there has been, I think, majorly influenced we could also say that their collaboration on Brahmaputra is it's like very minimum, and it has been also influenced by the border disputes and its political relation with each other. And because when Toglam incident standoff happened in 2017, the Chinese, they refused to share the hydrological data information to India. So India and China, they have MOU signed, Memorandum of Understanding signed between India and China in 2002, saying that India will pay some amount, and during the monsoon time, 15th of May to 15th of October, China would share the hydrological data to India. And because of the 2017 border issue, they didn't share. The Chinese government, they didn't share the data to India, and so in a way they are using the water as to gain their political power and to influence on it. I think each country, I would say, is kind of accusing other for hydro-hegemonic behavior. And in terms of Brahmaputra, it's not only the India and China, but then Bangladesh is also dependent on the water that flows from Assam and Arunachal as well. And then in terms of Indus, I think in terms of water treaty, as I said, I mean, recent year, Brahmaputra has also a problem of Brahmaputra has turned muddy these days. And so it has been, I would say, 6 or 7 years that, Brahmaputra becomes muddy, and people are concerned, local people and politicians are concerned. And so there is a speculation that maybe people are saying that it may be because of the monsoon, or maybe because of some infrastructure activity happening on the upstream of the Yalungtsangbo. But then both from the Indian government or the Chinese government hasn't given any clear information on the people why Brahmaputra becoming muddy, because it impact on the livelihood of people, its agriculture productivity. So that's a very major concern right now in terms of Brahmaputra. And then Indus, I think water, people say that, since India and Pakistan could sign a Indus water treaty, so that could be one example that India and Pakistan should take example or, encouragement memorandum to have a water treaty on that. And then in terms of, Satluj, India and China both has a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU signed from 2010-15. And also, I think now they are pending in terms of renewal, which should be done in 2021. And then they have an expert level mechanism. And so till now, India and China had 13 meetings of expert level mechanism held on that. And the recent one was held on 2022 through video conferencing. I think I would over here, in terms of hydropower plants on Tibet, so the China also face, major environment problem in terms of water shortage, and water pollution is major environment problem in China as well. And then the kind of dam construction that we see is right now, they invest a huge amount of investment on hydropower dam building. But then in a recent year, what I feel is that it's also very relevant to India as well, is that this year, 2023, China has introduced a policy called Qinghai Tibet Plateau Ecological Protection Law. So basically it talks about, at the head of the rivers, they talked about creation of nature reserves, national parks, and then they also talked about, in terms of mining, possibility of mining on the area. So basically, they are not really banning the mining activity at the heads of the river. So which means that once at the nature reserve or national parks, at the heads of the river, near the sources of the major rivers like Brahmaputra. So they create a nature reserve, and then they allow mining activities on that. And so this would have a huge impact on the downstream nations as well, because the mining would pollute, and then it would change the whole ecosystem as well. And so, I mean, one example is that, I mean, right now the China has lots of, policy, or they have a huge emphasis in terms of creation of national parks. And Sangjiangyuan is one example of national parks, saying that. So this, I would say, it's a Chinese government's project of beautification of whole Tibet, saying that we are building a national park, and then they would forcefully remove the people from national park and then make them settled in somewhere else. And then once they get the ownership of the national park, then they can either do a mining or infrastructure development. Yes, I mean, they can have a national park, but then it should have a consultation with the local people. And this whole process of policies has to have a positive impact on local people as well. And then I think I would like to also talk a little bit about the border infrastructure. We did mention about the border infrastructure as well. And the kind of border infrastructure on whole Himalaya belt, both from India and China side. I mean, we can see lots of, airports, railways, roads are... so it's there is a huge competition on that. But then we have to also understand that the whole Himalaya belt is the world's youngest mountain range, and it is very prone to landslides and flash floods as well, and then earthquake as well. And then because of the extreme infrastructure development, it can also cause climate related extreme weather changes, or the pace of infrastructure development would also add it to the natural vulnerability of the region as well. So the kind of infrastructure, and Claude Arpi also talked about the Shaoguang village, the village, border village built on the Tibetan side, and then from the Indian side, it's called Vibrant Village. Yeah, and the Indian government is also building a lots of, recent border villages or the border area. But then it's very important to understand that for us being a researcher or be a student of international relation or humanities, so we should be able to visit to these places, talk to the people, and see what's their real condition. And is this the one that they really want? So that has, I think, been missing in the whole these policies. And at the end, I think when I went to Mustang this year, and then last day in Arunachal and Tuting, their major concerns are very much different from what the state provide in terms of protection or economic development or safety. So I think people at the border are the ones who protect the land, but then, government officials from Beijing or New Delhi, come and then implement policy without even understanding the local condition. It's I think we are sometimes, I feel like, going in a very wrong direction. And then I would like to say that recently, last year, 2022, Ministry of Environment, Forest, Indian Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change, also they amended our policy of environment impact assessment policy of 2006, where government is saying that at the border area, so within 100 kilometers, if there is any infrastructure development or roads, the project, the implementers, the developers, they can self-satisfy the whole project, meaning that there won't be any environment impact assessment on this, which will have a huge impact on the environment as such. So looking forward, I would like to say that, in terms of water, the creation of effective transboundary management is really, really important. River basin organization, and including both the, in terms of, I think, suppose if we focus on Brahmaputra, both India, China, and Bangladesh, and then including the voice of local people, it's really, really important. And then collaborative research is one that everyone focuses about, because there is a lack of transparency, there is a lack of access to information and data, lack of access to go to a field and do a research. And then in terms of research, I think both from scientific and non-scientific humanity perspective or aspect should be there when we do research. And then environment impact assessment really, really neat. And then I feel that from my experience, participation of local community and equal participation of gender in policy making and policy implementation, adaptation, and mitigation of whole climate change concept that we talk about, it's really important to have a local community and then equal number of, gender in the whole policy making is really, really important. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for taking more minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Yang So. I now invite Ms. Dondup Wangmo, who's a research fellow at the Environment and Development Desk of the Tibet Policy Institute. She's trained in science and has a Master of Science in Zoology from Punjab University, Chandigarh. And currently, she writes on exploitation, environmental, and social impacts on the mineral resource of Tibet. So I look forward to your presentation. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since I got an opportunity to speak on today's conference, I thought I will be discuss on two main current important topic related to Tibet environment issues inside Tibet. And I think the topic that I'm going to discuss today are extremely needed to be addressed at this point of time. So first, I'm going to talk a bit on the climate change impact on Tibet, and second, how Tibetan nomads are resettled in Tibet. So there are many other topics, environment-related topics inside Tibet, but these two topics are, in actual is very much exacerbating and intensifying in Tibet that need to be addressed. So if we look back to the million years ago in Tibet, how Tibetans, sustained the Tibet's environment, many of the Tibetans are living as the nomad. So nomad, if we say, nomad doesn't stay in one place. Basically, nomad, they rotate within the seasonal, and they mostly their livelihood base live with the land and livestock. So Tibetan nomad has sustained the Tibetan ecology through their sustainable method. And after the Chinese invasion, there has been a lot of change in sustaining the Tibet's environment. So today, to begin with the first topic, the climate change impact on Tibet, there has been many scientific reports before and recently. If you look at those reports, I have mentioned the 3 reports. First is a scientific assessment of the third pole environment, and second, confronting climate change to save the third pole, and third, the climate change on the third pole, right? Not just these 3 reports, there are many other reports, including the IPCC and EC mode, and other research paper as well, have strongly and repeatedly warned us of Tibet facing the intense, climate change impact, including the rapid glacier melting. Second is the increase of the desertification, and third is the expansion of the southern lake inside Tibet. So if we compare to the a few years before, there has been the observation that certain lakes inside Tibet are, they are reducing in their size. But then recently, many research papers has concluded that there's a certain lakes in Tibet which are the level of the water are getting, the increase. They're expanding. The lakes are expanding inside Tibet. So, if we look at the, those research paper, and those report, and those climate change impact on Tibet, what we can get to know is that if we look at the expansion of the southern lake, what are those demonstrate, and what those climate change impact inside is showing us that Tibet as an environmentally might look after how and in which degree the Tibet might look as environmentally after a few years. So this is the first picture is the Amandri. This is the Tibetan mountain in Tibet. And the second is the image of the lake inside Tibet. So first picture shows the degradation of the glaciers on the mountain, and second picture demonstrate the expansion of the lakes. So those lakes demonstrate that how fast and in which pace the Tibetan glaciers are melting. And Tibet is often referred to as the third pole and water tower of Asia. It basically means that the cryosphere in Tibet is the main source of the water tower, is the main source of the major rivers of the Asia. Cryosphere is the most integral part of the Tibetan plateau, which keep this high altitude cold. And those degradation of those cryosphere will have the profound implications on the regional climate and water resources as well, right? For example, Indus River that flows down into the Pakistan, measure of this water of these rivers is the sources from the mountain glaciers. So if those mountain glaciers will rapidly melt, then those the people and those population that depend on the Indus River will face the challenges in future. And not just the Indus River and Pakistan, Tibetan Plateau is the head of the Asia's major river, right? Will have the adversely impact on agriculture, whether it is about the fisheries and other dependent purposes in the Southeast Asian countries. The change in the climate has severely impacted the Tibet's cryosphere. So one of the key noticeable and visual changes in Tibet caused by the climate change is impact on the cryosphere. So And I think that it is very imperative to start the comprehensive scientific research on a cryosphere and its influence on the water resources and regional climate. Moreover, to understand the local perspective on ecology will provide the real observations and information from their side that will help the scientists and geology and any other academic to understand it in a better way, how to manage and how to protect those cryosphere from the degradation. And if the degradation of the cryosphere will get intensified, the Tibetans in Tibet will be most vulnerable towards the climate change impact. Therefore, adaptive measures should be taken to mitigate challenges posed by the climate change impact. And today's for this session, I would like to discuss brief on the how Tibetan nomads are resettled in Tibet. Recently, in 2022, there has been a huge Tibetan nomads relocation from the Nagchu city, 3 counties of the Nagchu city, to the Lhoka in Tibet, Lhoka prefecture. So I'm going to be discuss on this. Nomad resettlement is not something new that has been enforced by the Chinese government. Starting from the various land use policies to the sedentarization and now the resettlement policy, the Chinese government has implemented the various policies to relocate Tibetan nomads. However, it is very certain that whether the government achieves, what it called for. There's no such graph or there is no such study that shows improve of the ecology through removing the nomads from their land. And despite many academics say the nomad actually, help in stewarding the land by using the invaluable traditional knowledge, the Chinese government narrative for the ecological resettlement in Tibet doesn't meet the on-ground implementation, management, enforcement of the environmental conservation. And the Chinese official discourse for the relocation is set for the 2 purposes. First is for the ecological conservation, and second is for the socio-economic development of Tibet. These 2 goals has been repeatedly used by the official narrative. And my question for this is that why the Chinese government is considering the relocation of nomads as a solution to improve the ecology? And secondly, why do nomads are considered as the illogical or the unscientific or the irrelevant? So the Chinese, for the conservation of the environment, I think that there are far better solutions than to relocate Tibetan nomads, because they has been sustain the ecology for so long. So removing them from their lands, I think doesn't make any sense. And if we compare to the recent relocation in Tibet, which happened in the 2022, which is the second batch, if we take consideration of that relocation, they have researchers have mentioned that this so-called development program, the nomad ecological resettlement, violate the human right, and this also involves the quotient. The consent is achieved through the force, and moreover, the consent is a structure and manufacture, which means that the state has already, structured and manufactured how to achieve the consent from the Tibetan nomads. There is no other option other than to say yes to relocation, because if they say no, there will be penalty or there will be any other pressure that the government will be pushed to the Tibetan nomads. And if I trace back to the article which is written by the Tsiringbum in 2018, he also do a similar analysis of how nomads were relocated in Tibet. He writes that although the Tibetans have taken a consent based on the conscious choice, yet it is not their active choice. Even though it doesn't look like the consent was achieved through the coercion of the state sovereign power, but on the other side, he writes that the conscious choice of the nomads is shaped by the state itself through the active elimination and the passive negligence of the education and health services in the pastoral areas. So, in reference to the many nomad relocation case studies in Tibet, the result, the propagation of the relocation is not just related to the uncertainty of the environmental improvement. On top of that, nomads were facing the multi-challenges post-relocation. The impacts of relocation and nomads are far beyond the environment. There is the complete loss of the cultural livelihood, deposition of the land, and the loss of the sustainable livelihood. Not just the livelihood, they are losing the sustainable livelihood. And even though the health and education services have become more accessible to them through the relocation, yet it is very difficult for them to search for the jobs that fits their potential and the expertise. So many papers concluded that there are higher chances of the Tibetan nomads becoming poor. And moreover, the Tibetan nomads through this relocation, Tibetan nomads are becoming more dependent on the government subsidies. And thus the life after the post-resettlement is extremely challenging for the nomads. Hence, I want to say that if the government and the policy really seeks to uplift the poverty, the government should properly analyze the life after the resettlement, or they should research on the how nomads are challenging after the relocation. There is no such study that eventually tell how nomads has been successfully, live their life after the resettlement. There is no such study. So there should be a study on how nomads were adapting to the new life after the relocation and challenges they are dealing with. And apart from the social and economic impacts on nomads, there's a huge question of the political priorities. So when it comes to the relocation, automatically it comes with the land, their resource, and the livelihood. These three things are the important things that attach with the relocation. So when I go back to the research paper, one of the researcher has written that although the relocation is perceived as a state environmental discourse, however, it's not just about the environmental. As the Chinese narrative has always mentioned that this kind of relocation is related to the environment and it's related to the benefit of the Tibetan nomads. But then it is more than that. It is not just about the environment. It's just more than that. It is a state policy to, accomplish the political interests over the environment by increasing the surveillance, rangeland use, and territorial control on the nomad. And few research papers by the semi-structure interviewing with the Tibetan inside Tibet, they have also mentioned that that is true that the grassland are degrading in Tibet. When the question arises, how does the grassland are degraded in Tibet? The description and the explanation for the grassland degradation between the Tibetan nomads and the officials sometimes contradict or sometimes has a different explanation. Nomads sometimes say that because of the unsustainable mining and because of the government interference in their land has degraded the grassland, but then Chinese government has most of the time blamed the Tibetan nomads for the grassland degradation. And if as the climate change is intensifying, right? So similarly, there could be, I think there could be a more reason for the grassland degradation, not just the overgrazing and not just not just will be tied to the Tibetan nomads. There are more reasons for the grassland integration. And keeping aside the overgrazing, there are also a diverse management system that will help in restoring the Tibet's ecological land. The relocation of the nomads is not an answer to protecting the grassland. Instead, the revival of their knowledge in sustaining the land and resources will help to restore the ecology. Simply living in the high altitude and believing in the traditional way doesn't make them illogical and irrational. Also, it is very highly unfair to protect the Tibet's environment and better the livelihood of the resettled nomads without having the meaningful, conversation or participation from them. So it is really important for them to have the fair participation in any policy making or any discussion on how to improve the Tibet's ecology. Thus, here I want to conclude on Tibetan nomads relocation that the relocation of nomads and herders in Tibet is not related to environment alone, referred to as the ecological resettlement. If you see the official news of the China, they have always written and they have always announced that they will not just write the nomad resettlement, they will always write the nomads ecological resettlement, which they want to show the world that this relocation are taking place or this relocation are carried in relation to the ecology. But then how ecology are improved through the relocation is nothing, there's no any answer to that. So it is more than the ecological goal that the government portray to the world. And I just want to correct that before Dr. Lobsang had showed the slide of the the Chinese announcement of the new law in Tibetan Plateau regarding the ecological. They have mentioned that they have most of the time they right to use the Xinghai Tibet Plateau and Xinghai Tibet ecosystem law or something, right? But in actual, it is not they want to make the Tibet and Xinghai as a difference. So it is the Tibetan Plateau. If they could write Tibetan Plateau ecology, whatever it is the law they are going to announce. So there's a bit of the correction. So I think that is for today's session, and thank you everyone.
So sorry, I'll have to hijack the session for a bit because Professor Shauti Chalaji is leaving. So I just want to thank her for her help and support in making this conference a reality. So yeah, just want to thank her. Offer a kata.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Yangso and Ms. Wong Mo, for the presentations. It provoked a few thoughts, so I thought I'll try to share before I open up for questions. The first thing I think that came through your presentations is a little bit more focus on international law. And in the course that I teach on India and China in international history, I try to situate as to what are the positions that India or the attitudes that we bring. And I rely on a work by Professor Prabhakar Singh, who's a international legal scholar who was here before at the university. What he pointed out is that, and it's an article called Sino-Indian Attitudes to International Law. And he points out how, in some ways, India and China bring different paradigmatic views to international law. By that, what he means is that India views itself as a kind of a natural successor to the British India, and therefore, in international law, there's a question of succession. Like we can even imagine it in terms of inheritance, like the family name or property and so on. So India naturally believes, we are continuing from the British state, and so we emphasize far more on the McMahon line. And I think today, I think a nuance was added to through Mr. Tsunzue, who pointed out about how we are emphasizing that Tibetan angle also, and maybe that presents an opening. On the other hand, China, even the Republic of China and then PRC has adopted a stance towards international law, which is it views the older treaties as unequal treaties. So therefore, even under ROC and later under PRC, they have been trying to revoke those unequal treaties. And so they see the Simla Treaty as, that something has to be revoked. So we are in a position of, in a kind of irreconcilable way. Fast forward, one new issue area where India and China are trying to take a larger role is in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Both these countries are actively engaged, and lately, under the negotiation of what is called as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction draft treaty, there are intergovernmental negotiations happening. And India, has been participating before, but China is trying to involve itself and contribute, I think, in some way through discourse, or a kind of rather new discourse, when its actions say something else. I think that's a conundrum to look at. On the context of, I think, grazing in general, one of the, I was reading a while ago a scientific paper about how we imagine, that the livestock go on these grasslands and they stomp on the grasslands and they cause damage. But it's quite a, what you call, unscientific way of thinking, because when these livestock move, they're actually, with their, through their movement, churning the earth there. Many a time they also feed on the various, weeds, or what we might call as weeds also. And so they actually keep, the population in check, they nourish. And of course, when they contribute back through manure, it nourishes. So this limited imagination of an ecological protection, I think by the Chinese state, I think seems to be, I think maybe like one way to be more harsh, like plains people thinking, people in the plains rather than, people in the mountains or high altitude, And a third, I think, which was hinted at by Ms. Wong Mo, is the word on livelihood. And I think this resonates in the Indian context, because if we look at the dam construction, especially the movement against the Narmada dams and the movement that arose, the Indian Supreme Court viewed that the taking away land was not just merely taking land, but it was also essentially a taking away of a livelihood. And therefore, they asked for more policy responses by the government to protect the livelihood, because those people who are dependent on these rivers, fishing or cultivating and so on, when they are moved, their livelihood is taken away. So one wonders if there are hints of that imagination, or a little bit more, if you can reflect also, that would be helpful. And I think, in terms of the whole cartographic stories that were reflected in the morning also, there's a small tidbit about the mapping, because from a work called The Great Arc by historian John Kay. He talks about how Indians had a sense that the river Brahmaputra arose in Tibet, but the British did not have the presence there. So they sent some Brahmin priests who would pass through what is today Nepal, and they would go and cut down these large trees and throw in the rivers that side. And they had observers in what is essentially today, Assam, kind of trying to look for those essentially large trees to come to then determine that the river path and but now today we have satellite and other. But at that time, this was in the early 1840s. So I just thought I'll add an anecdote there. Without anything necessity to respond to my questions, maybe we can collect some questions from the floor. So I open the floor for any questions.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. They were both very, very enlightening. So my question is that because Tibet is it's sort of the origin of many major Asian rivers, do you think it's possible for the downstream countries to have some sort of political unity? Even though they're not, I mean, they're very diverse. You have countries like Laos, Vietnam, Bangladesh, India. But on this issue, do you think it's feasible for them to have some? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. I think in terms of downstream nations, political unity and how are we planning to handle is that I think as we discussed earlier, what would be the solution in terms of transboundary water management on the whole Himalaya belt, right? So in terms of South Asia, we have India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan as a South Asia, and then from the Southeast Asia, I mean whole Mekong region as well. So whole area is very diverse, and in terms of political condition and its political relation and economic relation with each other is also diverse, I would say. So I think in that case, I also feel that I mean there should be some standard framework or river basin organization as such, so that there is a proper management, and so there won't be any misuse or I mean there won't be any misuse of whole upstream hegemony that they enjoy. Yes, I mean in my presentation I think I have been much reference to the international law in terms of water, but then I think from South Asian having its own unique history, culture, language, and livelihood, I think we need to have some framework in terms. So I think in that also, I suppose if we focus on Brahmaputra as such, Bangladesh should be also in a table, and they should also have a equal say on that. And but then I feel that environment is something that, since now in terms of I mean Brahmaputra, India and China, they as I said in my presentation, their relation or their dialogue on Brahmaputra has been also influenced influenced by its political relation or the border dispute. But then I think completely neglecting the whole Himalaya belt and the livelihood of people over there. So I think there should be some consensus, and then if the states are not coming together, then I think maybe we can invite a third party or the international organization to intervene, and then we have to also consult in terms of human rights aspect of the whole water security, and then I think slowly there is also ways to get international pressure or international community. And even I was hoping that maybe G20 has been great platform where we talk about whole water security on the Himalaya belt. Though there has been some progress in terms of climate fund or renewable energy fund, but not much emphasis on the whole Himalaya water security. So I think in that, I feel that both the academicians, civil society has a huge role to play, and then last but not the least, local communities understanding. South Asia also has a unique, how would I say, feature of believing on water deities or sacred mountains. So these traditional community-based knowledge or understanding also should be included in when we talk about transboundary water management.
reiterate my question from the previous session. So how do we draw a relationship between the Chinese presence in Tibet and the deteriorating climatic conditions on Tibetan Plateau? Because right now, it's not just about South Asia. The heating up and warming up of Tibetan Plateau, it disrupts the whole tropical and subtropical atmospheric circulation. So how do we draw that relationship, and how can, as students of IR, how can we contribute towards the protection and towards the betterment of that area?
Yeah. So while I was having lunch, I have been thinking about your question, and I was like, "What should I say?" I think yes. I mean, in past recent days, the kind of earthquake that we saw in Morocco, and they're saying that this is the heaviest earthquake after 100 years. And then Beijing is also experiencing, floods, and they say that this is the heaviest rainfall or flood after 140 years, right? So everyone is facing climate change and unpredictable rainfall and the floods everywhere, even in Himachal. I'm based in Dharamsala. So why Tibet is unique and why Tibet is different from all this climate or environment problem that we see everywhere, right? So for me, why it's, unique or different is that what I believe is that, yes, whole Himalaya belt is facing environment challenge, but the Chinese government's illegal occupation of the Tibetan Plateau and then they massive economic development policies are further degrading the whole Tibetan Plateau. So one reason is that I was born in Tibet, and then I escaped to India when I was 9 or 10 years by crossing the Himalaya belt. And so I studied from India, went to Indian universities and got schooling from Tibetan schools. And then in 2016, after almost like 2 decades, I could go back and visit my family. And so what I saw is that at the international level, so you earlier mentioned about the Chinese government's, their policies or their initiative in terms of global climate negotiation and initiatives, right? So in my small village in Tibet, so when I went, one of my cousin brother he said that I am in the local climate protection group. And I said, what is your role? And what do you get? What do you do? He said, I get monthly stipend. My role is nothing. They don't have any role. It's just for the namesake saying that local people they participate in the whole policy making. But from the outside, we see that they have some say in the policy making. But even at the very small level, at the rural village level, people are because I think for them, they give some incentive, hoping that they would not raise any voices against the government policy, because at the rural area, the local livelihoods are not that great, right? And then they are dependent on the government subsidies. So they would shut their mouths not to say anything because they are getting any free incentive by not doing anything, right? So this is, for me, one example of what colonialism does, right? Second, from my family example is that what do the colonial powers they do, right? They come and they conquer your land, and then they take away your land, and then they utilize that land for in the name of economic development. So my family has a farmland just near the highway, right? So now the roads are developing so much. And then every agricultural land that you have in front of the highway, it becomes very expensive. You become rich by just selling it, right? It's like you become very rapid, how do you say, somewhere like Gurgaon, right? You sell and then you become like all of a sudden in one night you become rich and that. And So my family saw that there is some opportunity that, we would not sell this land. So maybe in the future we'll get more, money by that. But then did they had any option? When the government said that we need this land, they had no option. So government gave my family two options. You sell us the land, I will give you money. The second option is you give me the land, I will give you nothing. So that happens when, why it's different is that people, in the name of economic development, government takes away the land from people. Who is there at the local level to protect them? No one. No law, no jurisdiction, no human rights lawyer, no civil society, no NGO. So only thing that they can do is just shut them out and not say anything. And then finally, I think I would like to say is that in the name of, we emphasized on the nomad relocation, right? So for them, what right now in Tibet is that they are changing whole education policies, saying that people, we have, like earlier people, like speakers said that almost like 90% of Tibetans are Buddhist, and we have this tradition of sending our young kids to a monastery, right? And the Chinese government set a rule saying that, boys or girls can become nuns and monks only after they turn 18. And so historically, monasteries, monks and nuns, they have been actively participation in the whole political movement. So that could be one reason why they are attacking the monasteries. And the second is the colonial boarding school, saying that a child, even between 4 to 6, it's compulsory that you have to send your kids in a boarding school. Even if like my family, has 2-3 kids, and so their school is just like 5-10 minutes from the home, but they were forced to send in the boarding school. That's the only way to get an education. And that boarding school is not run by the Tibetans or not run by any other institutions or international organization. It's run by the Chinese government, and it is taught by the Chinese language. Our whole syllabus is on the Chinese history and Chinese perspective on history, politics. Tibetan is still teaching as only the language, and every other has been taught in the whole Chinese. So there is a whole policy of, how do we say, erasing the Tibetan identity, taking away the land. So I think, yeah, I'm so sorry for taking really long. So this is what I feel that why for me, yes, I care about every environment problem that we see all over the world, but for me, Tibetan Plateau, the whole Himalaya belt that we see, is very close. As I feel very sensitive about that, and that's what happens when colonial power comes, and then they control your mind, your land, your water, everything.
Thank you so much for both the wonderful sessions, and I really like the last bit which you just said right now about in your answer. I hope I'm audible, first of all. As to how you care about the environment crisis all across the globe, but Tibet, of course, because it's your home and it's close to your heart. For similar reasons, anything which happens on the Tibetan plateau is also close to my heart, because Yarlung Sangpo or Brahmaputra flows into Assam. And because of patriarchal nature of marriage, my home is Assam. So, my question is around the weather modification systems which China is using in Tibet. And they've said that they are using sound waves to, alter the entire weather, or modified molecules around which clouds can form. I first read this in 2018, and then, I tried following it, but in the English media press, nothing was coming out. Till in between 2020, some agencies in France started talking about it, how disastrous it would be, especially for the Yarlung Sangpo, because, volume of water would increase, and almost every year we have floods in Assam because we don't know how much volume of water is flowing. China doesn't give us a clear-cut picture. despite the fact that we pay money for the exact amount of water flowing in the Yarlung Sangpo. So my question is, this year in August, 23rd August, if I remember correctly, China Daily and Xinhua, all of them started churning out this news article as to how they have saved Tibet because of weather modification systems. There are not extremes of droughts or, frost and so on. Since, you said your family is from Tibet, what is the exact picture? What exactly is happening inside Tibet because of the weather modification? Is it true that a lot of, natural calamities have been averted because of this so-called scientific modification of the weather? Thank you.
We'll just take if any other questions before we conclude the session. So anyone else would like? Okay, please go ahead.
So thank you for this delightful session on climate change and like this impacts like whole world and even Tibet. So like even while researching like online, there have been like an influx of like influences from Tibet themselves. Like they show the rosy picture that the nomads are living their own life. There is not much of a climate effect of climate change. River is everything. So how much does, and this has been successful since like even the people who live all across the world thinks that the Chinese government is right, like they are not suffering, and people think like the suffering of the minorities in China, not just Tibetans or people in Xinjiang, they think that it is a Western propaganda. So what do you think that this coverage by the Chinese government and like their agencies impacts like the concerns of the Tibetan people as a whole?
First of all, I think for the improvement of the environment, there should be a free of the information and any research paper. There are many Chinese scientists who research on the Tibetan plateau, but then how much we receive the correct information is of a question, right? If there's a not the clear information and the transparency in information, then I think there is no use to protect the environment.
Yeah, and I mean, with your question in terms of what you see from outside and what is the reality, yes, I think to some extent the kind of economic development that China has brought on whole Tibet area is like it's a huge, and when I went to Mustang or Tuting in Arunachal, the roads are terrible, right? But then, when I was in Tibet, the infrastructure development, the roads are, I think, it sometimes I feel like it's like too much, right? Even the highways, like when I was just traveling from one place to another, it was like clean. There was nothing over there. But then I saw people with, that, how do we, they wear a jacket for the construction workers. They were there just with the broom and, but it was clean. There was no garbage over there. So sometimes it was like too massive infrastructure, because I think for them, the infrastructure was economic development, where they can also, it also benefits the state government to function in certain ways in terms of bringing the army or mining activities as such, right? And then I think with the Tibet, as my colleague Tundu Wangwa said, that what is reality is that, I mean, we are not against the economic development, but that economic development has to benefit the local people, right? The question of development for whom, that question raises a lot when a colonial power brings lots of investment. And the second is that, I mean, what do we say? The kind of policies that in terms of language, human rights, freedom, since I do research on, I mean, focus on environment defenders as such, right? So there were like few cases where at the initial phase, they were like very much appreciated by the government for doing lots of environment projects. And then after certain time, so they feel when they sense that there is a possibility of some threat coming towards the government policies, then people end up in jail as well. So they were like recent this year, UN human rights body raised cases of 9 environment defenders who had been jailed just for protecting the ecosystem. So that's what one see in Tibet. And the reality is that right now I don't communicate with my family member because for good or for worse, WeChat is banned over here. And for the Tibetan community here in India, WeChat for those who have a family members in India, WeChat is the only way to communicate. But then since WeChat is banned, so many people don't communicate, are not able to communicate with the family members who you don't see for 10, 20, 30 years, right? So what that implicates our family relation, family bonding. So I think that's maybe also part of not having your own land or not having your own country, and then these things we have to go through. So I think reality is completely different, and I suggest, if possible, I think for Indian, it would be difficult to visit Tibet, but if possible, if there is some chance, go to Tibet, and even just for, government tour plans or something, visit Tibetan areas, observe, try to talk to people, and then try to talk to also, maybe I think here the personal stories, both the side has their own propaganda, that's for sure, but then hearing personal stories would help. And finally, for Shipana's question, I think from Tibet, in terms of weather modification, local people are really not aware of that. So sometimes the questions of the government, I think sometimes I feel that the Chinese government, they hold Tibet as a experimental zone where they do experiment a lot, and lots of this information that we see on Chinese media are not really aware of at the ground level, and local people are not aware of that. But yes, definitely in the name of clean energy, in the name of ecological civilization, government brings lots of projects on the whole Tibetan plateau, but how does that benefit the local people is still another, I think, a question. And I was not aware of any Tibetan sources talking about the weather modification. But I think weather modification would be also another one example of in the name of clean energy. And Chinese, they propagate a lot about solar energy, right? The recent years, Chinese are saying that they want to build the world's largest solar panels on the whole Tibetan plateau, and it has been there on the out. But what happens is that government says that we need a grassland, a land. So that land has been taken away from the people, and then they built a huge solar panel on the grassland, but not really understanding the whole ecosystem. And then there were cases of animal died because of they come across with the solar panels, and the lands were forcefully taken away by the government from the people. But then in the outside, it will also only seen as the clean energy government initiative. But then what local people have to go through is something that I think we need to pay more attention on it.
Okay, thank you very much for your responses. A thought that triggered, I think, with the question raised by one of the students is, if you look at the world, India and Pakistan and the Indus Water Treaty, it was facilitated by the World Bank at that time because we needed resources for construction of dams and harvesting of rivers. And when we think about that epistemic community, World Bank acted as a kind of a mediator. So I think such dialogues here, especially around climate, I think contain a possibility for creating an epistemic community in India, in Tibet, in China, because ironically, say the Tibetans lack a voice, when in fact they might be the best ones to understand the Tibet and climate question also. But I think exploring that, I think, is important, and the lack of communication, say through WeChat being disconnected, also does affect. And as a scholar, I think is to look, seek out research on those who are doing research on climate change, so that maybe it can be viewed as that apolitical less sensitive and so on, and having greater voices. So, with that, I think brief observations. I thank the presenters for making a wonderful presentation and the coming here. Thank you.
I'll just take 60 minutes, maybe. I think. Seconds. 30 seconds. I said 60 minutes. I mean, in terms of your question with the China in Tibet and how that makes environment different, is that I think I had a privilege of attending 3 UN climate change conference, COP meeting, and so how is that different from not having your own country is that the Tibetans, we don't have an official representation at the UN climate change negotiation tables. So that's one. And the second, the UN has never thought of having some space for the stateless people. And the stateless people have no say on the whole climate negotiation table. So that's one, right? The second is that when we try to talk about Tibet, no one wants to talk about Tibet at the UN climate change conference, even India, even Nepal, even Bangladesh, Pakistan. No one talks about Tibet. No one wants to, raise anything, even though, I mean, forget about water security thing, right? Just because their relation with China or the Chinese economic power or something. So that's what we go through. That's what we go through, what maybe the other also colonized nations, go through. So that's what, even at the global level where we talk about, voices or the human rights or the, inclusion of people, but that's in a reality, it's quite different. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lobsang Yangso and Mr. Hundup Wangmo. Thank you, Professor Pakanati, for taking out time for us and kindly moderating it and summing it up so well. We would like to show our gratitude to the speaker. So, Professor Panigri, if you could please. Professor Pakanati, I made a mistake. Thank you once again. We'll now move towards the ending of this wonderful day and all the wonderful sessions. So could I please have you on stage, Mr. CNEAS-JSIA, if you could kindly come here and deliver the closing remarks. Thank you.
Hello. Tashidele, namaste, and good evening to all. It is my honor and pleasure to present the vote of thanks for today's wonderful and very enlightened program titled Understanding Tibet in the 21st Century. It was indeed wonderful to be here at JGU Sonipat, especially this wonderful multipurpose hall, and listening to all our in-stream speakers come experts from Dr. Anand Kumar ji, Mr. Claudi Arpila, and Gates Chundula, enlightening us with us all in the session in the morning on India-Tibet relations, which dates back to 1,000 years. We have the India-Tibet relations, including the sacred relation of Guru and Chela, which His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama always mentioned in his address to Indians when meeting, and which is very significant in modern time, the India-Tibet relation. So thank you to all our speakers in the morning session. And just a while ago, we had the session by Dr. Lobsang Yangsola and Ms. Tundu Wangmula, who spoke on the environmental aspect of Tibet, the Tibet rivers and its significance to India, and the climate change impacts on Tibet and the resettlements of nomadic Tibetans inside Tibet. And in highlighting the implications that the environmental degradation that's happening in Tibet to the neighboring countries in South Asia, particularly to its immediate and the great nation of India. So thank you to both of the speakers. And with this, I hope and believe that today's sessions have ignited wisdom and created more awareness upon us all in better understanding the Tibet in modern times. And so India-Tibet Coordination Office hopes to have more such events in the future, which will be of much beneficial for all of us, especially the young minds of India and Tibet, which are the great assets of every country. So I believe that will be happening in future also. And my gratitude to JGU Sonipat, especially Jindal School of International Affairs, Center for Northeast Asian Studies. Thank you, Dr. Shilparna Pathak ji, Dr. Manoj Panigrahi ji, Dr. Saudi Chawla ji, Dr. Rajdeep Paganati ji. If I'm not wrong, I also got confused with this two, that's the name. Mr. Rakshit Shetty ji, and all others behind the scene who worked in making this event a reality. So I'm indeed, ITCO New Delhi is indeed grateful for all of you for making this event a very success. For this, we would like to please present a small souvenir gratitude to all of you. So I would request Dr. Shilparna Pathak ji to please on the stage. Dr. Shilparna Pathak ji, who had worked very and this souvenir, we have this. This picture is a very historical importance once. In 1959, the Tibet support groups, Indian, they had carried out a procession in support of Tibet. So it's titled Communist China, Hands of Tibet. So we hope to have such more support from India in the Tibetan cause. And next, we have Dr. Manoj Panigrahi ji. I hope I... And next, we would like to have Dr. Saudi Chawla already left. Dr. Rajdeep Paganati ji on the stage. The white scarf, I guess most of you know about this. This is called khata. In Tibetan, it's khata. It's a very sacred scarf offered for greetings and also on auspicious occasion. So it's called khata. For this, just for GK. And next we have Rakshit Shetty, please. And I would request all to please come on the stage. We have one souvenir which will collectively offer to you all for your department or the center. Please, ma'am. Please. Open. This is a wall hanging with the quotation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Please, Rajdeep ji, please come on the stage. That side. Thank you all. Yeah, please let me conclude first. With this, I would like to conclude by saying it's just appeal also. Please understand Tibet. In understanding Tibet, we will note about more about Tibet. That will save Tibet, and in saving Tibet, it's beneficial to India. So that will also save India. So it is a humble appeal and request from my side. And with this, thank you, Dhanyawad, Tashi Delek, and good health to all. Please take care.
Please do not leave the stage. We also have a small gift for you. Please. So this book was brought out by the students of our center last year, and this was tracking the initial responses of China, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Sadly enough, we didn't know how to include the responses of Tibet, but I wish we could have done that, and maybe it's an idea we'll work on. So this is the hard work of all our students at our center.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dr. Panigrahi, please. Dr. I would now request Mr. Rakshit Shetty, who has been working tirelessly as our center coordinator for making everything successful. Thank you to all the student volunteers. You've put in so many hours and been really patient with us. So Rakshit, could you please come here?
Okay, I'm so sorry. I know everybody wants to leave. I'll just take 2 minutes. So hi, I'm Rakshit. I'm thrilled to represent Center for Northeast Asian Studies today. On August 17th, our students at JSIA and JGU had the opportunity of watching two very thoughtful, thought-provoking films. One is The Sun Behind the Clouds, and the other was The Sweet Requiem, created by the esteemed filmmakers Ritu Sarin and Tenzin Sonam. They both were here at the campus that day. Now, these films opened our eyes to the complex realities and the narratives of Tibet and the Tibetans in India. With profound humility and immense gratitude, I stand before you as we draw the curtains on the enlightening journey that has been understanding Tibet in the 21st century. First and foremost, we express our deepest appreciation and gratitude to Dr. Sriram Cholia, our Dean, Dr. Sripanna Pathak, and Dr. Manoj Panigrahi for setting the tone for these discussions with their insightful remarks and providing us with all with valuable context. A special mention goes to Mr. Thupten Rinzin for his keynote remarks. We are also indebted to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Claude RP, Dr. Anand Kumar, Tenzin Sundu, Dr. Lobsang, and Ms. Dondo for sharing their expertise and shedding light on various facets of Tibet, from its historical context to the ecological challenges it faces today. Your insights have enriched our understanding. Our heartfelt thanks extend to the moderators of our two sessions, Dr. Swati Chawla, who's not here right now, and Dr. Rajdeep Pakanati, who skillfully steered our discussions, ensuring that diverse viewpoints found their place in this symphony of ideas. A special note of appreciation goes out to India-Tibet Coordination Office and Mr. Chonit Sering for his closing remarks, which left us with a sense of purpose and continuity as we conclude this event. We must also acknowledge the outstanding efforts by the Tibet Museum team and the Students for a Free Tibet team, who organized a brilliant exhibition on campus near Adda. You can visit there. This exhibition has been instrumental in enlightening many of our students about Tibet and its rich culture, fostering a deeper appreciation and interest for the subject. Last but not the least, thank you for the entire team of CNEAS volunteers. I mean, this event would not have been possible without you guys. And to our dear audience, or whatever is left right now, your presence and active engagement have been the engine of this event. As we part ways, let us carry forward the knowledge gained here as a beacon of enlightenment. By understanding Tibet, we become catalysts for cross-cultural empathy, advocates for human rights, and champions of environmental stewardship. Once again, thank you all for your participation and dedication to the pursuit of knowledge and understanding of Tibet. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.